banks are data companies, right? So every financial product is manifested by data. Yes, sometimes there's a human being at the front end of it. So in wealth management, you're going to want to talk to your relationship manager about your investments. But fundamentally, all the products are delivered as data. And if you want to do banking 10 times better, you have to get 10 times better at handling data.
Hi, hello.
Hello,
Greetings from London. Gaurav zooming in from Dubai. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Anthony, for those of the folks on the line who don't know you, could you give us a little bit about your background and context? You were a long-time banker. You ended up running Barclays Bank as CEO, and you chose about half a dozen years ago to set up your own business. Walk us through the process of why you decided to go down the path of entrepreneurship. What was the opportunity or problem you were trying to fix?
Yes, as you say, I spent the best part of 30 years working in the kind of mainstream financial services industry. I was at Barclays in the 80s. I joined Citigroup in the late 80s, spent 17 years there, 13 of which were in New York City. And then came back to spend a decade at Barclays, culminating in becoming the group chief executive. And after a long time in the industry, I was always really fascinated by two fundamental questions. The first was, why don't banks work better for their customers? It seemed to me that banks were about selling product, not really about helping customers solve problems in their lives. And for any customer, whether it's an individual or the treasurer of a large corporate, in financial services is not the primary thing that they think about in their lives. It's just an enabler. As I like to say, nobody wants to get a mortgage, people want to buy a house. And it's the same for the corporate treasury. They want to optimize their cash balances and FX positions in the benefit of their enterprise, but it has no intrinsic value in itself. So the industry has been incredibly focused on selling products and solutions, not solving customer problems. And the second thing that fascinated me, and it really went back to my time in the late 90s when I was in New York City at the first go around of the internet, and we were all very excited that we could get onto the internet with a 56K modem, and people were talking about technology disrupting financial services. And it really didn't. It provided the platform for a lot of innovation in the industry, but no real transformation. And so when I think about those two themes, and going back to my experience, particularly as the CEO of Barclays, dealing with an institution like all banks that had to reposition itself post the financial crisis of 2008, it seemed to me that the industry faced a series of existential problems that could not be solved through tactical initiatives. So those problems were, firstly, the rise of fintechs that were already, back 7-8 years ago, beginning to set a higher bar for user experience and really becoming much more customer focused. As I was saying before, one of the things the industry had failed to do. The second was data. There are many big tech organizations out there that are very good at handling data. Banks have lots of data, but they're not very good at handling it. And the third was just the economic model. And if you look at most banks, certainly in Europe, they trade at a discount to book. And the reason why they trade at a discount to book is because the market doesn't believe they've got a sustainable economic model going forward. And the answer as to why they don't is because they haven't readjusted their model post the crisis. And post the crisis, revenue is harder to come by, capital levels are much higher, but the cost base hasn't adjusted. And so the cost base is really a function of how work gets done. Work gets done incredibly inefficiently inside banks, and maybe we can expand on this a bit later on. But one of the things that I think banks are spectacularly bad at is just understanding how the work gets done and how to optimize that. We haven't been through as an industry what manufacturing went through in the 70s and 80s. And so those were the sort of thematics that I was dealing with through my career. And so when I left Barclays, I had a set of choices as to what I could do. I could do nothing, not really my thing. I could go and be, a serial NED on a set of boards that seemed very dull to me. And then I had this quite strong entrepreneurial drive, which I have really, although it doesn't look like it from the early part of my career. So I just had this idea that there had to be a way to make banking 10 times better through technology. And the fundamental thing about the company I founded, which is different to all the other sort of wannabes in the space, is we come at this as a business problem. Obviously, my experience as a business person, not just as a group chief executive, but having run many different types of businesses, having built lots of product in banking. And so I asked myself, how could we use technology to make banking 10 times better for banks, for their customers, and for society? And literally, I can say with 100% confidence, after 6 years worth of work, we have now solved that problem. And we solved it in a way that no one else in the world has. There are people out there who'll sell you a cloud native ledger. In my opinion, that doesn't solve any of the problems. All that does is give you yet another piece of core technology that sits alongside all the other cores you've got, and doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is really about how do you handle data much more effectively in pursuit of serving the customer. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's how we've got to where we are.
Anthony, you've touched upon a lot of points, and let's try to unpack some of them. So starting with the name of the firm, it's called 10X. And you've kind of hinted at this already, but talk about in a bit more detail some of the 10X shaped problems that your firm was set up to solve. And again, elaborate if possible on how you're different. You kind of, again, hinted on it. It's about solving business problems, not just giving another software package, but walk us through that, because obviously there are lots of these quote unquote cloud native software, next generation software providers these days.
Yeah. So fundamentally, we started off with two principles when we were designing the platform back in 2016. The first was that the architecture should be based around the customer, not around the product. And that is really important because effectively, if you look inside a bank today, they have a constellation of systems where the customer can appear literally thousands of times effectively as a unique entity on every single platform. And that is incredibly inefficient, because anytime you want to change a data element around the customer, like name and address, or add a product and service, it becomes very inefficient to do that. So customer-centric architecture is really important. And as you know, the Chase Bank in the UK is running on our technology. Very interesting experience for me as a customer of that bank. When they launched their savings product, I was able to open my savings account on the Chase Bank with just a couple of clicks inside the app, because basically we were just extending the relationship. You can only do that with a customer-centric architecture. The second thing was to disaggregate products into a set of services or features which could be assembled like Lego blocks to deliver a product. And the reason why that's important is because you don't have to build every product again. You've got a set of components. We have about 100 microservices on the platform that can be assembled to present product to the customers. Then the third thing, which happened subsequently, was the notion of a multi-tenant structure, where once we've done the hard yards of integrating our platform into the legacy systems of the bank, whether that's for regulatory reporting or customer master files, general ledger, then every product and service can be a subtenant on the platform. And what that means is you massively shrink speed to market for new products and services, but you also make the question of migration much easier to deal with. So let me just pick out some of the 10x, the 10x benefits that this thing gives you. And these things are, again, unique to our platform. So firstly, I built a lot of product in my time in banks, and it was always incredibly hard work to get a new product to market. It would take months, arm wrestling with the IT department to get into the queue, getting all the requirements documented and written. So one of the things we wanted to do was to have no code product development. What that means is today a product manager can sit down at a desktop and configure an entirely new product on the 10x platform without a line of code having to be written, without any requirements having to be written. And that product can be designed and then pushed through a workflow so it can be approved by compliance, legal, risk, finance, and once that's happened, it can be put into the queue to be released into production. So you massively shrink the product development life cycle from months, sometimes years, to literally hours and days. And that is a huge competitive advantage in a market that's much more dynamic. The second thing that we wanted to do was make sure that the data was easily accessible so that we could extend the functionality of the platform into things like customer servicing. So we've built an entire servicing suite on top of the platform using Salesforce, but basically that servicing platform looks into the data on the platform in real time. So you don't have this problem of data systems being out of sync where the customer service platform is looking at one set of data which could be days old, whereas the transaction platform is looking at something entirely different. And then the third thing that we've done is we've created the ability to stream data in real time from the platform. So for things like fraud, analytics, risk decisioning, that data can now be looked at in real time within the bank. So particularly at times like now where the economics are very uncertain, banks can look at customer behavior, make decisions in real time, and then push actions back into the platform. So those are things where we've literally gone back to first principles and said, okay, how would you make things 10 times better than doing it the old-fashioned way? The result of all of that is we have an incredibly powerful set of capabilities that can be launched into market in literally days and weeks as opposed to months and years.
Anthony, can I jump in? You've said before you wanted to build tech that you couldn't do when you've run banks, both in the US and the UK. What is it about, without being necessarily overly dismissive about banks, but what is it about these big organizations that stops them building this product? Why is effectively innovation being outsourced to people like your new firm?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I'm often asked, who do I see as the competitors of 10x? And actually, I don't really see any competitors to 10x because mostly the other people out there have just built a sort of cloud native component. The real competitor to us is banks attempting to do this for themselves. And although when we have these conversations, we always talk about things as a technology problem, it's really not a technology problem. It's a people problem. And it's also a people opportunity. And if you only have to look at other industries, look at Kodak. Kodak dominated photography. They actually developed digital photography for themselves, but the behemoth inside Kodak was the film business. Had a massive market share and a huge margin. So anybody who came along and said, hang on a second, we've got this digital thing over here, didn't really get airtime in the organization because it was dominated by the behemoth of film. The same with Blockbuster. I mean, Blockbuster came very close to buying Netflix. Blockbuster were the dominant provider of content, as we would now describe it. But they couldn't conceive of a world in which people, would be able to stream data in a way that would allow them to consume content in real time. So there are parallels in other industries where organizations don't sense when they've reached a point of transformation, and they think a sort of linear incremental approach is the right way to address the problem, and it isn't. And of course, you get into vested interests and fiefdoms and massive technology organizations that are doing these things who are interested in self-preservation. Because in big companies, most people measure their success by the size of their budget and their headcount and so on. I personally realized a long time ago that you should measure your success by how few people you have, not by how many people you have. And the final thing I would say is, this type of work requires intense creativity and fantastic engineering skills. And we've spent 6 years doing this. This is all we've done for 6 years. We've been able to attract the brightest and best from the industry to come work on something that's incredibly exciting and dynamic. So that singular focus and the ability to attract talent is something that's sort of unique to us as an organization that most big banks can't replicate. And that's why they will look to work with us to solve these types of problems. Now, do I think every bank in the world is going to do that? No, I think many banks will attempt to do it for themselves. Some banks won't even bother. But this is an existential set of issues for the industry now, a combination of all the things I talked about at the start. A lot of these technologies reaching end of life, a lot of the programming languages getting to a point where there are very, very few people who can use, actually use them. We all know about COBOL programmers, how hard they are to get. So that's why we've developed a solution, I think, that is A, unique in the industry, and B, can provide that transformation. So we talk to banks that are interested in transforming their business, not just in sort of upgrading it.
Great. I want to bring Gaurav into the conversation now to take this a bit deeper than I can do.
Thanks so much, Ronit. Anthony, I have to say, first off the bat, this is a very refreshing conversation. I mean, it's very nice to hear extremely genuine sharing of your experience on both sides of the coin. One from what is essentially now a vendor, putting it very simply, obviously you're a complex problem solver, to somebody that was trying to be a complex problem solver within an institution that was doing a different approach. The first thing I really want to bring out is, given my background as a fintech enabler, essentially to financial institutions, right? I have an awareness of core banking systems and delivering technology and product, right? In different, whatever that product may be, whether it's bank serving or customer focused. But what I wanted to ask you is, how many of your customers today have you got that have legacy infrastructure versus customers where they come to you right from the beginning? And that's the first question I want to ask you is that's my understanding, right? Because if you've been building this out for 6 years, obviously you're solving for people with legacy, but has the comparison changed in the people who are looking to 10x to be their core engine? Has it changed at all in that dynamic? Was it still very heavy on the legacy players, or new people who are thinking about the customer first coming to you and saying, you know what, we'll use 10x right from the start? And can 10x do that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of parts to what you said. And again, this problem often gets articulated as being, core banking replacement, core banking upgrade. That's not the business that I'm in. And by the way, I don't think that solves any problems for anybody, because what you've done is you've taken a clunky old bit of code that runs on a mainframe and replaced it with more modern code that runs in the cloud. And my big response to that is, so what, right? Might be a bit cheaper, might be a bit more modern, you might not have to worry about COBOL programmers, but fundamentally you haven't changed how the bank works. And so the essence of this is about massively handling data more effectively. Sometimes bank CEOs stand up and say things like, we're not a bank, we're a technology company. And I have to say that there is a...
That's true, Anthony. They have so many technologists, right? More technologists than all those West Coast tech companies.
And that's the next thing they say. And you think, okay, let's just think about that, right? Actually, banks are not technology companies at all. And again, back to my earlier comment, boasting about the numbers of people you've got, I don't think is a particularly good success metric. What banks are data companies, right? So every financial product is manifested by data. Yes, sometimes there's a human being at the front end of it. So in wealth management, you're going to want to talk to your relationship manager about your investments, but fundamentally, all the products are delivered as data. And if you want to do banking 10 times better, you have to get 10 times better at handling data. And this is where, the whole core replacement thing is it's an illusion, because all you're doing is modernizing your technology. You're not increasing your ability to handle data. Whereas on the 10x platform, because I can stand up simultaneously with a new transaction processing engine, a new servicing engine, I can massively reduce your cost in the back office, because actually my servicing engine can predict how to respond to a customer inquiry and handle it automatically, because I've built all of that already. So to come to the question that you asked about legacy versus sort of new activity, what's sometimes regarded as greenfield, what we've done today, what's publicly out there, is we've worked with Chase to launch their bank in the UK. Obviously, that's a greenfield activity. We've launched Bank as a Service for Westpac in Australia, obviously a new activity. But for both of those things, we have had to deal with integrating our platform to their legacy systems. So to their general ledger, to their reg reporting, to their global customer masters. And that is one of the hardest parts of this, because you're trying to make very modern technology work with legacy technology. We've cracked the code on that, so that's fantastic. But what that then enables us to do is to deploy subsequent use cases much more quickly. And recently, Westpac announced that they were going to move their transaction services business to 10x, which is, for most banks, the sort of jewel in the crown, because it's central to what they do. It's highly profitable. So we are now on the journey of beginning to migrate that activity onto 10x. And our view is that all the banks that we're talking to currently, there are some that we're working with that are not announced and others that we're talking with, are all going to go on this journey of standing up the first use case, which may be something new, but then progressively moving the legacy onto the platform and sunsetting the old systems.
It's very interesting. And that gives a lot of insight into, ramping up very well to my next question, which is, you've been doing this for 6 years. And what I'd love for you to take us through, I know we're limited on time, and there's a lot of devil in the detail when you're talking about something this size with an impact, with organizations the size that are adopting the technology and the platform, is tell us about where you started. You look at a blank piece of paper 6 years ago where you first started, and you've built up your services, your solutioning, your problem solving, your engines, your data, and everything. Where do you start? Can you tell us? Exactly, right? I see you're smiling. It's not an easy question to say, what's the first thing I have to do for, one, people to understand what I'm trying to do, how I'm going to go about doing it, and then subsequently, you say today you've got the biggest, great minds working with you. That's easy to say after you've built up after 6 years, but tell us where you started and how that evolved a little bit. I'd love that insight to share with everyone.
Well, I'm sure fellow entrepreneurs on the call will recognize this journey.
Exactly.
You start with an idea, right? And I always think the fundamental question for any entrepreneur is, can you identify a real problem? And for me, entrepreneurs are all, and I include myself in this, slightly quirky, because by definition, we see the world differently. Because if we saw the world the same as everybody else, we wouldn't be identifying problems that needed to be solved. So, having spent so long in the industry and been frustrated by these things, when I left, I didn't want to go back and work in another large organization. I didn't want to sort of bang my head against the wall I've been banging against for 20 years on these things. And I literally began to write it down on 2 pieces of paper, the problem. And then the solution, I remember drawing the solution as a kind of simple bucket that said, okay, let's think about the customer. If you imagine a picture of a bucket on a flip chart, that's the customer. And then let's think about what happens to the customer. Money comes in, money goes out, and then things happen to that money. So fees are charged, interest is paid or charged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, when you go back to that first diagram that I drew and you look at the architecture of the platform now, it's totally brought it to life. And the second thing, as I said earlier, I was thinking about, okay, if you think about those actions that are applied to the customer represented by the bucket I drew, they're fundamentally the same for every financial product. all financial products have money coming in, money coming out. Some financial products charge an interest rate, some pay an interest rate, but actually it's the same calculation, just moving a different way. So those early thoughts and thinking were, the first two parts of what I think is the entrepreneurial journey, which is A, can you identify a real problem? And B, can you conceive of a solution that is at least 10 times better than the old-fashioned way of doing it? Because if you can't, why bother, right? So, nobody's going to buy, something that's like half a times better than the old-fashioned way of doing it. So, although actually, having said that, some people will buy that solution if they think it will protect their technology empires inside large banks, but that's another question. So as an entrepreneur, I said, okay, here's a real problem. Can I conceive of a solution that was 10x better? And so that was the things that I was describing in terms of drawing the diagrams. And then the next thing for an entrepreneur to say is, okay, I've got a problem. I can think of a 10x solution. Can I actually physically achieve that solution? Is it possible to bring it to life? And of course, we were massively advantaged by that stage because we already had cloud. We had so all the tooling around that allowed us to develop the microservices. And so the great thing was the tools existed. Now, could we actually use them to solve the problem? And that was the journey that we went on. And then the next thing you have to do as an entrepreneur is say, well, okay, that's great. I've got a problem, I've got a solution, I've got a way to build that solution. Now will anybody pay me for it? In a business, you kind of need to get paid. So that's where we started to secure clients and go on the journey with them. And then the sort of last thing is, okay, you got paid, but can you generate enough revenues from enough clients to make your business economically sustainable? And that could be because you're generating cash, or it could be because you're investable, or some combination of the two. And then I think the entrepreneurial journey is a circle, right? So once you've done that, then you go back around and back around and back around. So we're sort of in that last stage now of generating the clients to ensure that the thing is sustainable going forward. And I'm really, after 6 years worth of work, I'm incredibly positive about where our business is, because by the end of the year, I'll be able to serve every customer grouping from an individual all the way up to a large corporate, with pretty much all the asset and liability products, from savings, short-term lending, long-term lending, secured lending, revolving credit, mortgages, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll have a full set of functionality then. Also, importantly, I'm now running at scale with our client Chase in the UK here. It's obviously for them to disclose the volumes going across their platform, but they're big. And we're way ahead of any of the so-called people we're bracketed in terms of numbers of customers and activity and stuff going across the platform. And so we've demonstrated the platform works. We've demonstrated we can build enterprise grade with all the necessary performance and security that goes along with that. And we've proved we can do that multi-geography, which is also important because banks, it's a global market, so we need to be able to show we can deal with local regulation and all of those types of things. So the business is in great shape, frankly, and it's all about adding clients now.
And I know I'm very conscious of time before I hand back to Ron, but I just have one short last question, which you just literally scraped at the top there, which is, okay, you've built something, you've been doing it for 6 years, you're expanding, it's picking up, you're building more to go along with it. Now, technology is useful. Technology has scale. Technology has the users. But even with that, going global as a company, right, facing regional compliance or regional security rules and regulations, how much of that in your next part of your journey are you finding is something that you will take your time to do? So for example, the context is, if I'm serving a base in the EU and the United States, because to some degree in those geographies, it's very holistically applicable for you to go out there and spend time for return. Or, are you venturing to the continent of Africa, or say parts of the Middle East as well, or Asia? Because this is a global requirement to some degree, to people that are perceptive of engaging with you to adopt 10x effectively, right? And you must be getting a lot of inbound interest, but there must be a restraint on your ability to plug and play in different geographies to this extent. Is that true, you think, or is that not so true? You think it's very simple because those ecosystems have their compliance set up within their frameworks? How does that resonate?
Yeah, it's not, it's not simple at all, but there are a number of sort of challenges around that which we've solved. So first thing is you need to have a cloud provider in the geography that you're dealing with. That's important. Second thing is data sovereignty issues really matter, so you have to be able to deal with those. Thirdly, regulation. We found a way to accommodate local regulatory requirements in a way that doesn't sort of corrupt the evergreen nature of the core platform. So we're currently working in 3 geographies, 2 of which we've disclosed, UK, Australia. So we've sort of cracked the code on that. There are some uniquenesses to the US marketplace, but we know how we do that. So for us, the issue is not, and of course, payment systems are local, but again, we've been able to create a set of adapters that will connect the platform to local payment systems, and we're doing that. As I say, we've done it in 2 markets, we're doing it in a 3rd at the moment. For me, the issue is not so much the local market issues. The issue is, does the bank have what we describe as a 10x problem, or a 10x shaped problem? By which I mean a bank that wants to go on the journey of transformation, as opposed to a bank that wants to modestly upgrade some of its technology componentry. And so we're quite careful now about the banks that we work with, because we don't think it's going to solve the bank's problem when they come to us and say, oh yeah, we've got this system, we put it in 1970, it supports our checking account business, and now we need to modernize it because it's gone out of support and our data centers are very expensive. You can replace that system with a modern cloud native ledger, but as I said before, so what? You're not going to solve any of the challenges that we've been talking about here, because you're going to connect it to a bunch of plumbing that still looks at the customer product by product, that doesn't allow you to do no-code product development, that doesn't allow you to easily hook your customer service systems into it, that doesn't allow you to stream the data in real time. So, for those that are in the market for a transformational solution, we're it. And that's much more for us to make sure we're working with the right banks. And it's perfectly legitimate for a bank to say, look, I just want to upgrade my technology. It's fine. That's your call. Go do that. But I guarantee you won't be getting the 10x benefits if you do that. And you won't be driving your cost income ratio down, which is, when I set the business up, I always thought you should be able to run a bank with a 30% cost income ratio on our platform. There's no broad scale, retail and commercial bank in the world that's running at that sort of level. So, and I think that is very possible now with what we've built.
Thank you so much for that. And then on that note, I have dozens more questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to hand back to Ronit on this one. Thank you.
Maybe just one question to wrap up our session, Antony. You mentioned right at the start, this is about people, not technology. And CFTE, the organization that's hosting this podcast, the founders always talk about, this is about the people behind the technology. And in your personal journey, in the last 6 years of being an entrepreneur, building 10x, what's been the biggest surprise or difference, having been a very senior banker and run one of the biggest banks in the UK? What was it like when you look back and go, wow, didn't expect that? I mean, kind of knew that on paper, but the visceral feeling of running a startup, that's question number one. And related to that is, in sort of 5 or 10 years time, if you're a future UK or global bank CEO, what's the skill set? Like, if you're like the Antony of the future in 5 or 10 years time, what do they need to run an organization such as that, be it a Barclays, a NatWest, a JP Morgan Chase, etc.?
Yeah, good questions. So I think the two things that have struck me about this work as an entrepreneur is, firstly, things move incredibly quickly as an entrepreneur, because you're not sort of dragging the legacy organization behind you. So speed really matters. I mean, we can, and back to your early question about, well, why don't banks do this for themselves? We can just move much more quickly than they can, because I can pivot my resources and my focus much more quickly. And I'm not sort of held back by the sclerotic bureaucracy of big organizations. The second thing, of course, is the highs are much higher and the lows are much lower. You know, we've never been at a point where, you know, we couldn't make payroll, but, you know, there have been certainly big ups and downs on the journey, and you don't get that in an established business. You know, if you beat your plan by 10%, you're a hero in a big bank. You know, our swings are much, much, much bigger than that. So those are the things that I've sort of observed about this work versus the stuff I did before. Of course, there are many similarities. All businesses are about people. All businesses are about getting the best out of people. I often think that leadership is about getting people to do things they wouldn't ordinarily do, because if they would do them ordinarily, you wouldn't need leaders. They just get on with it. So, you know, and that's the same in a fast-moving entrepreneurial business as it is in a big company. I think for the CEO of the future, you know, banks are inherently highly leveraged organizations. You know, when I began my banking career, you always talk, well, leverage is really important in companies. You know, you don't really want to have, you know, you don't want gearing that's more than like 0.2 or something. Well, banks are massively geared organizations. So, you know, risk management is always going to be important in banking. But I would add to that two things. One, a much greater sensibility about the role of banks as serving their customers. And secondly, a deep understanding of how to use technology to create non-linear transformation. Because the industry is in a phase now where there are going to be winners and losers. Regulation and capital levels, of course, have protected the banks from the sort of transformations I described with Kodak and Blockbuster, but that won't protect them totally. So as a CEO, you need to be able to understand how to use technology and leadership to create this transformation. That doesn't mean you have to be a technologist, but you do need to be able to understand the potential of technology. And this is why I think it's so important for bank CEOs and boards and executive committees, you know, not to do these sort of ridiculous tours to Silicon Valley and let's go and look at a Tesla factory and so on. That's just kind of tourism in my view. But what's really important is to understand what's going on in the fundamentals of the sort of quantum foam of tech. And let me give you a couple of examples. So, you know, if we were talking 3 years ago and we'd say, okay, we'd be doing something like this on Zoom, we'd all have thought we were mad, but we had to get used to working much more virtually because of COVID. And we always think about platforms like Zoom as what enabled that, but actually Zoom's just the very front end of this. What enables us to do this is we've all got high-speed broadband in our houses. So I've got 350 megs of broadband here in my house, which means I can do this. It wasn't at all the fact that Zoom existed. Without the broadband connection, which is there because, you know, we all consume content at home, we couldn't do this. And I remember going, when I left Barclays in the autumn of 2015, I went to Silicon Valley and I spoke to a whole bunch of people there, but really small companies. I remember talking to an AI startup and they were telling me about these incredibly, you know, huge data sets they were parsing and all the things. And I said to them, that must take huge computing power. And they said, well, yeah, it does, but we just go to AWS and, you know, they gave us $100,000 credit to get started and we just buy what we need. And that just struck me as, wow, that is really fundamentally different to how I observed what was going on in the late 90s, where all of these startups were raising millions of dollars of VC money to fund servers. You don't have to worry about that anymore. I don't have to worry about going to buy more servers as my client's business scale, because I just go buy it from AWS. So when the fundamentals of technology shift, that's what creates the opportunity for transformation. And you won't learn that by looking at a Tesla factory. You'll learn that by actually investing a bit of time to understanding what's going on with cloud technology and the cloud, the ecosphere of sort of cloud native tooling and what that enables you to do.
Antony, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. It's been a real pleasure again to host you. Whenever I sit down and chat to you, I always learn and reflect on the industry that we've both been part of for so long. And so appreciate your time today on behalf of Gaurav, myself, and CFTE.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.